Hi, everyone. For those of you just joining us right at the top of the hour, I'm Michael Barber. I'm your host here at our Charter School Capital webinar series. We are going to give everyone, including one of our co-panelists, just a few minutes to hop in here, and we'll get rolling in just about 2 or 3 minutes. Hi, everyone. For those of you who have joined us in the last 60 or so seconds, we are going to get started right at about 2 or 3 minutes after the hour. So just hang on for just about another 60 or so seconds, and we'll get started with our panelists. Hi, Monique. How are you?
Hi, sorry about that.
No worries at all. We were holding on just for a few minutes till you hopped on. I heard you had some childcare management challenges, like we all do in this virtual experienced world.
Yep, hand, foot, and mouth is rampant at the moment. In case
Got
you
it.
haven't had that experience.
Fair enough. We'll have to have you chat with some of our team members who have been facing the same thing. Apparently, it's a thing at the moment. So, all right. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get us officially kicked off. I just want to say good morning or good afternoon wherever you are in the world. For those of you that are big fans of our webinar series, you will know my name. I'm Michael Barber, and I'm the host and content producer for our team at Charter School Capital. Today, I'm joined by Monique Ramos and Branche Jones. If you've been on our webinar series before, particularly our California budget webinars, you'll be familiar with both of their names and these faces, I think. They're here to give us an update on Governor Newsom's 22-2 and 22-3 budget and some critical legislative updates concerning charter schools. You'll recall we had a similar conversation back in March when the governor released his proposed budget and a small update from that proposal. And now we're back to discuss the most recent revision along with that signed budget. We would encourage you to ask your questions using the Q&A window available right within Zoom. We'll do our best to get to those questions along the way. Also, if you've got colleagues that maybe are a little bit busy at the moment or have got another meeting, we will be recording this webinar, and you will receive that recording after this session later this afternoon. There's also a handout for today's discussion. We will make sure you get that handout in your inbox with this recording. Give us about 2 to 3 hours to get all of the particulars, the I's dotted and the T's crossed, if you will, and we will make sure to get that handout, which is a lovely guide to the discussion today, as well as this recording. Now, as mentioned, my name is Michael Barber, and I'll be your host today. If you aren't familiar with our team at Charter School Capital, our mission is to help you get where you're going. We do that by securing charter schools a consistent stream of money and other resources, along with helping schools find their forever homes. We serve charter schools by helping them with things like facilities financing, so your schools can find their place within their community, enrollment marketing to ensure you have full and thriving classrooms, and a consistent, stable source of money that ensures you have the day-to-day funds to operate your school. Along the way, throughout the last 15 years, we've developed an absolutely amazing library of resources like this webinar, which happens to be our 71st webinar we've done. And to find all those webinars and resources, you can head right over to our website at charterschoolcapital.com. There you'll find in-depth ebooks and one-pagers chocked full of information to help school leaders run their charter schools. Now, just give me a few moments to introduce the two other lovely faces you see on your Zoom screens today. We're going to start with Monique Ramos. Monique provides California Strategies and Advocacy's clients strategic insights regarding the state budget and the legislative process, as well as specialized policy expertise. Previously, Monique served as the Director of Government Affairs Division under the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlickson. In that role, she managed the Superintendent and Department of Education's Government Affairs portfolio for 5 years, including the state budget strategy, advocacy, and testimony in the Budget Committee and Subcommittee proceedings. Welcome, Monique. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
We're good on this end as well. It's good to see your face again.
Good
Second person joining us this afternoon is, of course, our friend, Branche Jones. Branche has been around the California legislative process and the policy process for many, many years. He's been a friend of charter school capitals since our existence starting 15 years ago. And he's joining us to give us his expertise on what he is hearing from all of his musings and all of his sources at the state capitol. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the both of you to take us from here. As mentioned, if you've got questions, please do your best to pop them into the Q&A. We will do our best to get them as we go throughout this conversation, and then we'll have some dedicated Q&A time towards the latter part of our chat. So Branche, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us away.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Good morning, Monique, and good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you taking some time out of your day to listen to our spiel. We'll start out with just some budget discussion, and I'm sure most of you know what's in the budget. We'll talk about that in some depth, and then we'll talk about some legislation that's out there. Also want to discuss the politics of Sacramento's interesting times, interesting things going on right now. And we'll talk about the upcoming elections and kind of what the perspectives looks like. Doesn't tell you right now, it doesn't change much, but we'll talk about it a little bit. If we can't get to your questions, we can always follow up. More than happy to do that. The document that Michael talked about that you're going to be provided is a great guide to the budget provided by our friends at Capital Advisors. We do a lot of work with them, and we partner on a lot of projects with them. Monique does as well. So that'll be a good follow-up guide so you can better see and clearly understand the different aspects of the education part of the budget. Just at a very high level, everybody knows we had a record surplus this year. I think it was 95 or 97 billion, Monique. So I think
I don't remember which. It's so much.
One of those numbers. So everything got funded. And I mean, everything in the budget got funded. It got funded at a very high level. We had an interesting budget process this year. Usually, the governor introduces budget in January, revises it in May based on tax receipts and projections. And then both houses pass a budget and they go into what we call a conference committee to decide, what they're going to finally send down to the governor for his signature veto. This year, we did not have a conference committee. Seems like we've been having less and less public hearings, which is less and less opportunities for you to weigh in or for us to weigh in on your behalf, or whoever's representing you in Sacramento. So it's kind of odd the way it came together, and the legislative leadership actually hammered out an agreement, which then they went and negotiated with the administration on. So that's how we got to the final product. Very healthy. You're going to get, total Proposition 98 number for 21-22 budget year is going to be 110.2 billion, and they're projecting it for 22-23 at 110.4 billion. So that's higher than we've ever been. It's kind of ridiculous where we're going, but the way we're funded in this state, largely by tax receipts from the wealthy, saw a heavy increase in the state's budget. The governor also was able to fully fund the public school system stabilization account. So all reserves in education and state reserves are fully funded. They put in 9.5 billion this year into that account over 3 years. Your base COLA was 6.56%, and the legislature added another 6.26% on top of that for the LCFF base grant, which will bring you to 12.84% higher than the base grant was for your per pupil funding. And I know when we talked earlier and we met earlier, we talked about that number being north of 10%. based on projections and what we were hearing. So it's almost 13%. So that's a ton of money. One of the good things before we talk about declining enrollment is that we really didn't have any huge charter school fights this year. You know, in past years, there was questions about whether we'd be funded for future enrollment or growth in enrollment, things of that nature, especially for non-classroom based charters. Minus the declining enrollment piece, we didn't really have that fight this year. So we came out and there was a number of bills that died along the way that dealt with declining enrollment, ADA funding. And at the end of the day, they all included charter schools in them, which is a huge step forward for us from a policy perspective. But there is two different pieces to the declining enrollment section of law that they enacted. Non-classroom based charters are not included. And for school districts only, they can claim the greater of their current year, prior year, or average of 3 prior years funding for their ADA. For all classroom-based schools, they can claim the current year enrollment or the current year enrollment adjusted for pre-COVID levels that's adjusted for COVID absences. So that was two different parts of the declining enrollment statute, one that applied to all classroom-based charters and all classroom-based schools, and one that just applied to school districts. There was a huge fight about whether non-classroom-based charters should be added into that. And there's some policy implications there and philosophical differences from all over the place. Because basically what you're doing with that money is you're funding students that quote unquote aren't in attendance, but you're trying to hold districts and some charters harmless, as their terminology states. So that was the one piece that was contentious that, you know, we still will probably have to revisit in some fashion, but that part of the law, you know, it's really, for no better term than kicking the can down the road, because a lot of urban districts and some suburban districts really are feeling declining enrollment, which was exacerbated because of the COVID policies and the independent study programs that the state forced them to offer. So, Onik, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I just think the declining enrollment discussion is going to continue to be a long-term policy discussion, right? This is the first time in modern history that California has faced declining enrollment and lower birth rates holistically as a state. And so how that impacts charter schools and school funding holistically, while there's a fix temporarily for school districts, but the larger implications of that, I think, continues to be a long discussion, and it's going to be a discussion that all schools need to be concerned about moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's a great piece that we'll have to talk about, and Monique's 100% correct on that point. Two other grants or programs to talk about. The Learning Recovery Block Grant was funded at $7.9 billion, and it was extended so you don't really have to implement it until, I think you have 27-28 year to fully implement that program. And the funding is going to be based on your unduplicated pupil percentage. If you're, I think it's over 70%, you get more money. And if you're under that, you get a different level of funding in that. So that's one. And the other one was the Expanded Learning Opportunity Program. That program and its funding rates are up on CDE's website, so you can actually look to see where your school's funded. It's about $4 billion. Again, unduplicated pupil count on kind of a sliding scale. Many non-classroom based charters are opting out of that program. So that's something you can do, and the guidance again is on CDE's website. So I would actually tell folks to look at that and take a hard look at that to see if you want to participate in that program and meet the requirements, because there's going to be some auditing of that program after the 23-24 school year. So we all know what auditing means, and I don't know if that's a JLAC audit or a state audit, but that's going to come into play later down the road.
And I would just add, Bronte, there's also the arts, music, and instructional material discretionary block grant at about $4 billion. So apparently there's some cleanup needed there in order to get the dollars out the door. So we should see cleanup in that in Budget Bill Junior, which will, or junior, the third,
Yeah.
I don't know what we're calling it. That should occur sometime in August. And then CDE will post and let LEOs know directly how much money they'll be receiving once that cleanup occurs.
Yeah. Yeah. And the one guidance that we've been talking to folks about is for non-classroom based charters who have to do SB 740 funding determinations. Excuse me. Clearly, a lot of this funding and the previous COVID funding has thrown some of your reserves into whack. And people are showing up for their funding determination with very high reserves that some staff at the state board and CDE are questioning. So we would really just remind you to, think long and hard about the plans you put forth and the conversation you're having with those staff. Additionally, the State Board of Education has 4 new members. So some of your more senior members of the board that are gone now, who were more open to charter schools and understood how you operate, are no longer there, which strengthens the staff's hand when it comes to your funding determination. So we haven't seen anything really crazy yet, but I'm just letting folks know that may be an issue and has come up in discussions. So you might want to think about that.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think the legislature, there's the looming recession, right? And I think, everyone's kind of waiting to see how that's going to fall and what are we talking about, how bad and what it looks like. But I do think that the legislature has tried really hard to shore up K-12 education, right? That emergency learning block grant is pretty flexible and they're giving you 5 years to spend it. And that's quite a bit of money on top of the fact of we've never had a $10 billion reserve in Prop 98 alone, much less the other reserves all throughout the state budget that are very robust and healthy. So I think, not to say that everyone shouldn't be fiscally prudent, but, we are going into a likely recession, right? With much more flexibility in dollars at hand and flexible dollars for the near future than in any recent time.
Yeah. Did you want to speak on transitional kindergarten childcare just a little bit, please?
Yeah. So there's a lot shifting. Last year, obviously, a lot was adopted with the expansion of transitional kindergarten to include ultimately all 4-year-olds by the time it's fully implemented. The first expansion occurs this upcoming school year. And so children with a birthday before February are now allowed to participate in TK, and schools are allowed to receive prorated ADA for those programs. So I think that there's just a lot of moving pieces into what this means, right? California has a very robust childcare program and state preschool program. In the past, since really the Great Recession, money was poured back into childcare, really into preschool, primarily 4-year-old preschool spaces, and those contracts were available mostly to LEAs through Proposition 98 dollars that have to exclusively go to, charters, school districts, or county offices of education. So there is, I think the legislature views a lot of flexibility for LEAs to implement this TK program. While the TK portion of it is only mandated to be a part day program, and it does have significantly smaller staffing ratios, right? And they are going to audit for that. They did clarify that in this year's budget. There are other dollars that are available to wrap to provide whole day care. So some of those dollars would include the expanded learning opportunity grants that are out there. I think that there are questions of many in K-12 as to whether that's going to be enough per student to really provide care, particularly to 4- and 5-year-olds. But I would encourage you to look at other options that are on the table. There continue to be unutilized California State Preschool Program, CSPP spaces that do pay at a higher rate. And there are a lot of flexibilities or a lot more money that come with that, although it does require a state license from the Department of Human Services. I'm sorry, for Social Services, but there are lots of ways to kind of match programs together and work, and you can always partner with and create consortium type agreements with county offices of education or other school districts also to serve those needs depending upon what your program looks like. So it's a lot of shifting pieces, particularly for our 4-year-olds, and a lot to be discussed, but the legislature has given a fair amount of tools and flexibility to LEAs in order to implement that program. Is there anything you'd add to that, Branche?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you.
Mhm.
I'll just give you a brief summary of some of the independent study changes that were in budget. It provides a new optional methodology for LEAs to combine work product, basically time equivalency, and synchronous instruction to generate attendance. It amends current thresholds for the tiered re-engagement trigger to include not participating in more than 50% of synchronous instruction in a school month. That's down from 60%. Allow students under the care of a medical professional to be excluded from long-term independent study requirements, tiered re-engagement, synchronous instruction, and option to transfer back within 5 days. And also allows LEAs to claim attendance for students receiving virtual services from non-public, non-secretarian schools under certain circumstances. So, the administration believes that's going to give you some flexibility. You run your program, so you know better than us, but that's where they ended up. But additionally, they're requiring the certificated employee designated as having responsibility for the special education programming of the pupil to sign the written agreement. So that's something else that they're doing, and that will impact you. And we expect CDE to come out with guidance around all that. I don't know how fast that'll be, because it's just, the trailer bill is 100-something pages long, and there's a number of changes that CDE has to implement. And first, they'll produce guidance for that. You can usually find that guidance on their website, and they do have an email distribution list that you can sign up for, so you can get email changes and proposals as they come out. But that's really what we wanted to talk about in the budget, kind of the big pieces. I think the key things, takeaways are the declining enrollment issue will be revisited. And Monique talked about the possibilities of recession and what the budget will look like for the upcoming year. We don't anticipate it'll be anywhere near this healthy. So I think that's going to be, a huge change to schools in terms of the funding levels you'll receive. But for this year, they were very high. So that's a good thing for charter schools and for schools in general and kids in general. So.
I'll just add to that, the COLA, but particularly the additional base increase that they provided to schools in LCFF, that got rebenched this year. So that is in the base. Because they are rebenching Proposition 98 every year for the next few years in order to account for the growth of the 4-year-olds in TK, that is in that base. So there is a healthy increase in funding that is, I think the view is permanent, that is going to schools for the long term. Legislation, they can always rebench Proposition 98. But I do think that their perspective is they created a pretty healthy base increase, understanding that schools are facing pretty significant increasing costs across the board, and that there are things like staffing shortages and other needs that have really escalated the cost of basic education. Agreed.
With that, we just also wanted to additionally put a couple pieces of legislation on your radar screen. If you participate in the Charter School Facility Grant Program, you should be looking at AB 2484 by Ms. Bonta, which talks about how, if your charter closes, whether you have to pay those funds back to the state or not. Not the state, I'm sorry, to the local district. There's been a lot of amendments proposed to that. Believe some of the language in that bill is problematic, because I don't know that you have funds left when you close, or whether they should revert back to the LEA where you're at, or revert back to the state, or how that process would even work. The treasurer's office runs that program. and they are not in support of that bill. They believe it's problematic and kind of be hard to operate. So that should be on your radar screen, AB 2484. And another one is SB 941 by Senator Portantino, who's chair of the Appropriations Committee. Excuse me. That's an interesting bill because it's going to allow school districts, charter schools, LEAs to enter into an agreement with one or more local education agencies to offer individual classes to pupils from other LEAs who have been impacted by disruptions, cancellations, or teacher shortages in science, technology, engineering, or mathematics classes, or dual immersion programs. And we believe that's an interesting bill because it starts to provide a level of flexibility at the local level that we've never had before in the state. Used to be the teacher had to be contracted through the LEA, and this doesn't totally change that statute, but it definitely opens it up a little bit. So I think that's something that you should have on your radar screen, something that could be good for charters and flexibility moving forward. And the last bill, which I'm sure you've heard about, that we want to mention is SB 1343 by Senator Leyva. And that bill states that new charter schools would have to participate in STIRS and PERS. It doesn't apply. She amended out any retroactivity, and it does not apply to renewals at this point. It would just be new schools. But that's definitely something to think about in budget for if you have a school opening or you're contemplating opening a new school. That's something that you'll have to deal with. I think if I, had my crystal ball, I would say that bill passes because there's so much funding in the budget that, the legislature will assume that they funded part of that. And so it should not be a heavy burden. So wanted to put those on your radar screen. And also just for next year, with the moratorium being extended for 2 more years, but coming up, we're concerned about any looks into non-classroom based schools. Haven't heard anything but definitively, but heard some rumblings from the Capitol about looking at how non-classroom based charter schools, not how they're funded, but how they operate. My anticipation is there'll be a piece of legislation around that issue next year. So we'll have to deal with that as it comes up, but just wanted to make sure that was on your radar screen. Did you want to add anything, Monique, that you've heard or bills?
No, I think you covered it for the most part.
So those are the things that concern us most. And just really briefly, we'll just hit on the politics of Sacramento. We have this interesting dynamic that I don't know if you call it an ongoing speakership fight, but we had a speakership fight. So before the summer recess, and where Assemblymember Rivas assumed or somehow came to the conclusion that he had the votes to remove the speaker and be voted in as speaker, which led to just a lot of bills dying on the floor because you have different people in different camps, different people with Assemblymember Rivas, different people on the side of the speaker, Rendon. And it made it hard to weigh in on some bills because you didn't want to come down on one side or the other and get sideways with some of the members, or especially the speaker's office. The speaker was able to fight off that challenge. So he's still there, and they're coming back August 1st. Summer recess is over, the end of July, and they'll be back. And, Rivas, Mr. Rivas is still kind of pushing the envelope. I don't know that he'll have the votes. Our saying is always, if you don't have the votes, you probably won't have them next week. So if he didn't have the votes and couldn't force the issue last month, I don't know that he'll be able to do it in August, but he's going to try. And what that'll lead to is in the November elections, a lot of people kind of supporting different candidates, right? The speaker will have his slate of candidates that he's supporting. Mr. Rivas will have his slate, and there'll be some what we call Democrat on Democrat crime going on for the general election. It's kind of inside baseball, but it's interesting to watch. because the annex is under construction and the Capitol is basically closed, we were deprived of the fun and joy of watching this thing play out in person. So we all kind of played phone tag and ran down to the new legislative office building where the members are housed now, and dispense with advice or kind of help spread rumors or do what we normally do in our jobs. But that will be something to see. And Mr. Rivas's brother used to head up Govern California, which participate in a lot of education reform issues. So you can take that as him being more open to charters, more understanding the charters. We'll see how that plays out, but it's definitely going to, impact kind of the landscape that we're playing in future years. And if you take that all the way and you think further about the elections, I think about 25% of the legislature will be leaving next year, or they've already left. We've had a high number of resignations, people running for higher office. We've had redistricting, so people are running against each other. People are running for Congress. So you're going to have, I think it's 25 to 30% of the members will be brand new, which leads to an opportunity for us to get in front of new faces and new people and talk about our issues and explain to them how public policy impacts us in the state. Additionally, the chair of the Assembly Education Committee, Patrick O'Donnell, and the chair of the Senate Education Committee, Connie Leva, will be leaving. They're not running for re-election. So you're going to have two new individuals in those positions. And, everything that impacts us and impacts what we care about goes through those two committees. So that'll be something that we'll need to stay abreast of and kind of think about how we're interacting with the new people who are appointed to those positions. Do you want to add anything to that?
I would just add that, so we're losing 23, 25% this year, and then we're losing basically almost up to 50% in 2024. So because of the combination of term limits and redistricting, we will have almost a new legislature with the combination of what's known today between, again, the resignations, people not seeking re-election, and those who are leaving. So it really is huge turnover. I would add that getting to know your candidates now, we're at top two is more important, frankly, than getting them to know them once they're up here in Sacramento. It's very difficult to get in to see them, and their schedules get much tighter once they're up here. So I have plenty of public clients who are, frankly, governmental entities that will do invitations to both candidates, and especially because we're at the top two at this point, and invite them to tours and just do basic general education as to what your schools are. And I think doing that now goes a long way before they head up here to Sacramento, so they know you once they're up here.
Yeah, we can't stress how important that is. So they're actually looking at you and the students you serve as constituents, as apart from just some advocacy around charter schools. And believe it or not, they actually do look at that differently. So Monique's 100% correct, and we just want to stress that, and it's important, and it's a huge opportunity actually, because a lot of the folks running don't have an educational background, so they're not steeped, they're not coming from the school board. Some of them are, but most of them are not, and they're pretty open. And one thing that our redistricting process does, because we have a redistricting commission, is it makes the districts more competitive than if the legislature was drawing the lines and deciding who would be running in what district. So that's an advantage that we have in California that we haven't really utilized, that I think we really need to think about and look hard at next year. And the other thing I would say is, I'm always pushing graduation speakers. Get your legislators or your local elected officials out, speak at your graduation, tour your school. Vitally important to changing the way they look at charter schools in California. And for people who have non-classroom based charter schools, in this world where the moratorium is expiring, or whatever they're going to do with it, it gives you an opportunity to jump in that conversation and try to really explain what you do. And I think you'll find that because of COVID and because the state decided to force everybody to offer independent study, more people are open to understanding or learning about it, or learning about your educational delivery and how you operate with your students and parents. And I think we've seen that, again, as I said in the beginning, we've seen that evolution coming from not being funded for growth to being fully in on the COLA and this kind of super COLA they created, which is good for everybody, because the deal is that all students should be funded. So those would be the piece of advice we have for you today. And that's basically what we wanted to cover today. Michael, I don't know if there's questions you want us to answer, if anybody has any questions.
Well, you covered all the questions as we went along, but I wanted to say two things. First things first, I have to give Branche a massive apology because I totally fumbled over your introduction because my dog decided at that moment of you being introduced to knock an entire glass of water over on me. So I want to first
No problem.
take it on the chin and say I apologize for totally fumbling over your introduction. That was not intentional.
No worries.
The second thing I'm going to ask is, I think you've just hit on something that probably is of interest to any number of our California and greater national charter school leaders, which is how to engage your political candidates beyond the tours idea, beyond having them potentially speak at maybe it's board meetings, maybe it's times where parents are at your school. What other ideas would you have for engaging those political candidates off the top of your head?
I think the school visit, for me, that's the most effective tool. So they can actually, I like to have them interact with real people. I don't consider myself a real person. I'm a lobbyist. They know that. So they'll listen to me, but I like to actually let them see what's going on and how the school is operating. The other thing is, at some point, we'll be able to bring people back up to Sacramento. So that's, the old days of you bringing your school up, the legislator giving you a tour of the Capitol and introducing you in the gallery. We still do the gallery part, but the tour part has kind of gone away because of COVID and because of the construction. But I think that's the other way, to have them, meet their legislator or interact with their legislator. It seems simple, but it's really effective. And I think what you want to do is you want to come up with ideas that remove you from like the charter school CTA wars, right? You don't want to be a part of that. You want to be, like I said earlier, you want to be seen as a constituent that lives in Assembly Member X's district. And these are the things that would be helpful. When there's a piece of legislation, and I always tell people this, when there's a piece of legislation, let's try to find a way to support your local assembly member. We do a great job of, riling up the masses and opposing stuff when it's going to hurt our interests, as we should, and we should continue to do that. But one of the things I try to do with my clients, and I know Monique does as well, is have them weigh in positively. Miss Weber, I didn't mention it, but Mrs. Weber, she's Dr. Weber. And it's funny, her mom is Dr. Weber also, but she's the Secretary of State now. But Dr. Weber has a bill that would fund low-income students, AB 2774. And that's a bill I look at and say, hey, that's good for everybody. If we're going to provide more funding to the neediest people at our schools, irrespective of where they live, everybody can get on that. Right. And she's already open-minded. Her mom was a great charter school supporter, but everybody could jump on that bill and send in a support letter or offer their support to her. And some of my clients have done that. So I think those are just a couple of ways. I don't think, Monique, if you have any others, but those are the ones first come to my mind.
I actually just want to underline a couple of your points in the real category, in the discussion of real people. I also don't consider myself apparently a real person, but I do consider your principals and your teachers and your site leaders real people. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is for legislators to meet those people and those students. That's really who they want to see, that it's not the rest of us, frankly. And then additionally, supporting bills. We really don't do, as a field, a very good job supporting legislation. And while the Weber bill is great and a great place to jump in, what about that bill that your local assembly member has to address something that makes sense to you, like school discipline or something else, but something that you can lend support to? Really, that's how you develop those relationships, is finding ways to support and engage with those offices beyond the site tour. So, if they're holding local fairs, is there something that you can do to jump in and offer a support? Keeping an eye and signing up for their listservs and joining their fairs or their turkey drives or their back to school drives, if you have that capacity, in order to help support them as well. It's a two-way street.
Just on a note about timing, we have a question from Dan Labar asking, is there a preferred timing to invite folks to campus that's preferable, at least on the candidate side?
I get them in now. It depends on how competitive your local race is going to be, in all candor. It gets harder to get in to see folks, obviously, during October and even September. So getting it in sooner means that they can, get it on the books. And if, it doesn't work out, at least you made that attempt to invite them, right? And you can reference that if they do win and the tour doesn't happen. And
for sitting legislators, the session in an election year, which is this year, ends at the end of August, and in an off year, which is next year, it ends in the middle of September. So anytime after that date, they're usually in their district. They're not up here, so it's easier to get them in, during those timeframes where they're in their district. July is usually summer recess, so again, they're not up here; they're in their district. So they're more apt to come out. And when I do my invitations, I just say whatever works for your schedule, and we'll just figure it out, right? And remember, you're not, for candidates especially, no campaigning, no electioneering, but an informational stop is always good. And these are what I call safe visits. A long time ago with Monique, I used to do childcare stuff. And I always used to say to the candidate or the legislator, that's the easiest visit in the world, because they're not going to ask you for anything. They just want you to, the most they'll ask you is to read a Dr. Seuss book to his class, right? So that's a safe visit for them. They don't have to prepare much for it. Not a lot of prep, and they're not going to be hit up for different things. And a lot of times I'll tell the advocates not to go. To Monique's point, the principals and the teachers and the students, and sometimes we'll have parents there. Those are that's the four groups they want to hear from, right? And they will listen to them, and they'll take that in. And I just want to emphasize again that, with COVID, it's kind of changed the calculus that everybody uses when they think about schools. Because I can't tell you the madness we went through last year when the administration was trying to rewrite the independent study regs and nobody could implement them. And that just doesn't include charter schools. That was county offices were going ballistic. So to their credit, and I'm not saying they've got this perfect, but to their credit, they've tried to adjust some of their thinking and try to adjust, some of their policies around independent study schools. So again, that's a huge opportunity to get them kind of while they're thinking about it and why people are being forced to do it. And, the way the COVID's going and the variants, I don't know that we ever go back to normal, whatever normal is. So I think this is just part of what we're going to be doing. There's a lot of independent study in the state.
Can I ask a question as a constituent? These sort of automated opportunities that we have to send an email or do some sort of automated phone calling to our legislators, are those impactful at the state level? I've always wondered the answer to that question is how much attention is being paid when a legislator is receiving, potentially thousands of automated emails that all say the same thing.
It gets counted, having worked in a legislative office. So, when you're annoyed and pissed off because the fax machine has run out of paper for the third time that day, there's a grumbling in the office that occurs. And okay, so I will say when it's in thousands, it's noticed. But really, you want to get ahead of it, right? You want to spend that time to be able to have that relationship ahead of time, so that, maybe your email then isn't that automated email, but it's like, hey, met you at, have that relationship, or you have a staff member you can call. That goes a lot further than it's an added to the thousands of emails or faxes. I'm dating
Yeah, and I
myself
think
when I said faxes.
Yeah, no faxes. I had a fax story real quick, but
Mhm.
I think that to Monique's point, that's why you want to get on the front end, right? So you're just not seen as another number. They actually know you, familiar with your program, maybe familiar with your personnel. Additionally, as a former staffer, I'm reading. You're looking at it all, right? You're going to read it all. I'm reading everything that's handwritten first. Like if you actually took the time to write something out, But when it's a major issue or a huge fight, that's a tool we have to employ. But it has to be employed correctly. A long time ago, when I was in association, we were fighting a bill that the Republicans hated, so they were on our side, and the Democrats were pushing it. And we had all these fax. We did have a fax machine. It was a long time ago. And we had all these faxes going in, and we actually broke the Republican leader's fax machine in the Senate. So his chief of staff called me and he's yelling and screaming. And the short and the end of that is we didn't need to send him any faxes. So I don't know how he was on the list. So you need to target those things. A lot of times, last couple of years, when we've been fighting like AB 1316 or some other different crazy bills, you have a bunch of moderate Democrats who are on your side. And what you want to do is you want to get them enough information so they have cover, quote unquote, so they can hold their position, but you don't want to irritate them to death. And we would get calls from people saying, hey, look, we're already going to vote with you. Can you turn the machine off? Could you tell your people to stop? I'm trying to run my office. So I think, that's a long answer, but they're needed at times. The personal touch, however you can create that, is always better.
It's good insights for sure. You've also sort of cued a little idea in my mind that we should be considering as charter school leaders, and that's the fact of knowing that we're going to turn over 25% of the legislative body in 22 in the midterms, and then in 24 almost 50%. It's going to get significantly more expensive for charter schools to handle enrollment marketing efforts. So something that's an aside but related. It's going to get more expensive to be filling those school seats as we get through these next two election seasons, given just how much dollars are going to be spent over the next 2+ years. But that's for another conversation. It's just me connecting some dots for those individuals that are listening in. Anything else you two wanted to share before we give everyone a few minutes back?
No, just want to thank everybody for spending the time with us today. We know your time is valuable, and we really appreciate you tuning in. And hopefully we said something that's helpful or insightful today. And you can always follow up through Michael, and he'll make sure we get you an answer if you have any additional questions come to mind.
And Monique, any last thoughts before I close this out?
No, I think that's it.
Wonderful. So first of all, big appreciation for the both of you again for joining us. We will, of course, call on you again as next year's budget starts to take shape and as we get through revisions and passing another budget in a year or so. So we look forward to that conversation. As a reminder, we have recorded this session. You're going to receive that recording as well as the guide that we posted in the chat. And probably this afternoon. Give us a couple hours to get sort of all the I's dotted and the T's crossed on our end. If you don't receive it, just reach out to growcharters@charterschoolcapital.com and a member of our team will get you all that you need. And if you have any questions that you'd like to direct to either Branche or Monique, we'd be happy to get you connected to the both of them. Again, want to reiterate both Monique and Branche's thanks for joining us. We always appreciate your time and attention on our webinars, and we look forward to having you back for the next one. Take care, everyone.
All right. Thank you.